wow, some news stories just hit you right in the gut, you know? And today we are diving into one of those, a powerful earthquake, 7.7 magnitude that struck Myanmar.
Yeah.
And, you see the early reports coming in, and they are so vivid. I mean, rescue teams in Mandalay are saying they are literally digging through the rubble with their bare hands.
It's incredible.
I mean, just that detail tells you everything you need to know about the scale of this and how urgent the situation is.
Yeah, that image of digging with bare hands, I mean, it's striking.
Yeah.
It really speaks volumes about what those first few hours after the earthquake must have been like, and the potential lack of heavy equipment,
Yeah.
in the areas that were hit the hardest. And it is really tragic. But this wasn't just limited to Myanmar. The impact of this quake, we saw a huge building actually collapse in Bangkok, Thailand.
Right.
And that really, just emphasizes how far-reaching the effects of an earthquake this large can actually be.
Yeah, exactly. So for this deep dive, we've got a really detailed BBC News report that's been covering this as it's unfolded. And our goal here is to really understand those immediate impacts, pull out those crucial details from those first critical hours and give you a clear picture of what happened and what it means, what it signifies.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack this. And I think the best place to start is right at the source in Myanmar.
Yeah, for sure. So the report confirms that the epicenter was in Myanmar itself, and the initial death toll that's been reported by an army general is devastating. At least 144 people have been killed, and hundreds more are injured.
It's just awful.
So it really gives you a sense of that immediate human cost of this disaster.
Absolutely. And, we talked about that account from the rescue team in Mandalay. We are digging out people with our bare hands. I mean, you can just feel the desperation in that statement, and it really underscores the immediate challenge of rescue operations when resources are so limited.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, in these early stages, the military junta has declared a state of emergency in several different regions. Mandalay, Saging, Magway, northeastern Shan and Bago.
Yeah.
And that really indicates that, officially they're recognizing how severe this disaster is and they're trying to mobilize resources.
Right.
But it also makes you wonder, how effectively they're going to be able to implement these efforts given, the current situation in the country.
Yeah, and following that declaration, you see all these urgent appeals for blood donations going out across Myanmar, and that just highlights the medical emergency that's been created by the hundreds of people who've been injured.
Yeah.
It's just a stark reminder of the direct impact this has had, on the people there.
And the report also brings in this really crucial personal perspective from a Myanmar student in the UK. Her name is Miyat Sipang. And she's been having a really difficult time getting in touch with her family and her friends. And this brings to light another really important issue, apart from the immediate physical damage, and that is the communication disruptions.
Mm-hmm.
This just really highlights the challenges that happen in a country when, media access and information flow can be restricted.
Yeah.
And that could really hinder not only personal contact and reassurance, but also the coordination of relief efforts.
It's a good point because, natural disasters don't happen in isolation, and these pre-existing vulnerabilities, like in communication infrastructure, can make the impact even worse.
Absolutely.
And then there's another quote from a rescuer that really gets to me. People are screaming, help me, I feel so hopeless. I mean, that just gives you a sense of the chaotic reality on the ground.
It really does. And then if you look at the photos that are coming out of Mandalay, you can see the visual details of the damage. And they're widespread structural damage. Buildings have been reduced to rubble. Some are just leaning precariously.
Oh, wow.
A 7.7 magnitude earthquake is a powerful force. I mean, it can inflict this kind of destruction even on well-built structures.
And to make things even more complex, Doctors Without Borders is describing the situation as complicated because of significant communication blackouts in the areas that were hit the hardest.
Right.
And they're also pointing out that the ongoing civil war and damaged roads are making it incredibly difficult to get aid to the people who need it most. It's just this confluence of really serious challenges.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. The existing conflict there has really weakened the infrastructure and communication networks.
Yeah.
And that's making the delivery of aid and the coordination of rescue efforts so much harder.
Right.
And this combination of, armed conflict and a natural disaster like this, it creates this exceptionally challenging humanitarian crisis.
And then you've got these really concerning points that are being raised by Amnesty International.
Right.
They're highlighting the potential for the military to politicize aid distribution, and they're drawing on past history where they've allegedly denied aid to areas that are held by resistance groups since the 2021 coup. So their concern is that these communities and ethnic groups that are already vulnerable are going to be further marginalized when it comes to getting essential assistance.
Yeah, that raises a huge question about, the impartiality of aid. In an environment that's already so politically charged,
Right.
historical patterns of aid distribution, they can definitely create these legitimate concerns about, is everyone going to have equitable access to the aid, regardless of, their political
And,
affiliations.
and then UNICEF is adding another layer of heartbreak here by emphasizing that this earthquake is going to be especially devastating for the children in Myanmar.
It's so
They were
sad.
already facing immense difficulties even before this happened, and they're working really hard to bring in those emergency supplies like tents and hygiene kits. It's a vital response because children are so vulnerable in crises like this.
Yeah, UNICEF's focus really highlights how important it is to consider the disproportionate impact that disasters have on vulnerable populations. Children have these unique needs, and they're dependent on adults, so they often face much higher risks in the aftermath of a catastrophe like this.
And to wrap up the situation in Myanmar, the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, is actively working to assess the damage, and they're getting ready to provide aid like shelter as soon as they can establish safe routes to Mandalay.
Right.
And they're saying that the 1.6 million people who are already displaced by the conflict are going to have their hardships exacerbated by this earthquake.
Yeah.
So it's a massive humanitarian emergency that's unfolding.
Yeah, the UNHCR focusing on those safe routes just shows you how challenging the security situation is in the region right now.
Yeah.
I mean, the existing displacement crisis means that there's a huge portion of the population that's already incredibly vulnerable, and this earthquake is undoubtedly going to make things even worse for them and increase their need for assistance.
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult situation in Myanmar. So let's shift our focus now to the impact that was felt in Thailand, specifically that building collapse in Bangkok. This really shows how the effects of a significant earthquake can extend across borders.
Yeah, the collapse of that unfinished high-rise in Bangkok is a powerful image of how strong this earthquake was, even at a distance.
Yeah.
The reported casualties are significant. 6 people died, and initially there were about 100 construction workers unaccounted for, according to local authorities.
Oh, gosh.
So the large number of missing people was a major concern right after the collapse.
Yeah, and the rescue operation in Bangkok sounded massive.
Sure.
They're using drones, sniffer dogs, and heavy equipment like diggers, all focused on that collapse site. I mean, it's a race against time in these situations.
Absolutely, and it's a sobering thought,
Yeah.
but the report said that no survivors have been found in the debris at the time of reporting.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, and the fact that they found people who had died outside the structure suggests that the building just failed suddenly and catastrophically.
And what's really concerning is that over 400 workers were at the site, but only about 300 were accounted for initially.
Yeah.
And the report indicates that a lot of the missing are likely Burmese migrant workers. And this brings up that really important context of cross-border labor in the region.
Yeah, this is a crucial point.
Yeah.
Thailand has been a destination for Burmese migrant workers for a long time, and they often find work in sectors like construction.
Right.
And tragically, the civil unrest in Myanmar has actually increased the number of people migrating to Thailand for work.
Right.
So this makes Burmese workers a significant part of the workforce in Thailand, and in this case, they're a particularly vulnerable population.
And the scene at that collapse site, it's described as just chaotic. Hundreds of rescue workers, the flashing lights from emergency vehicles, cranes towering over the wreckage, and this enormous amount of debris. I mean, it just shows how big that building was.
Yeah.
And being located near the Chatuchak Market, the popular tourist destination, it just emphasizes how much disruption this caused in the city.
Yeah, and on top of that, 2 other buildings in Bangkok were evacuated overnight, and volunteer engineers are planning to inspect over 2,000 more buildings just to make sure they're safe.
Wow.
So that really indicates how worried people are about potential structural damage across the entire city after those tremors.
Yeah, and there's this one really poignant detail in the report about a woman who gave birth on the street in Bangkok after the hospital was evacuated because of the earthquake.
Oh my God.
It just encapsulates the widespread disruption and fear that rippled through the city.
Yeah.
I mean, even essential services were impacted.
It really shows you how these cascading effects from a major earthquake can go way beyond the areas that were directly hit.
Right.
It affects everyday life. It affects critical infrastructure in these unexpected ways.
So looking beyond the immediate devastation in Myanmar and that building collapse in Bangkok, it's clear that this earthquake had a far-reaching impact.
Yeah.
The fact that buildings collapsed in Bangkok, which is quite a distance from the epicenter, really emphasizes just how powerful a 7.7 magnitude earthquake is,
Yeah.
even in areas that aren't typically thought of as high risk for seismic activity.
Absolutely. And there's a firsthand account in the report from a teacher in Bangkok named Rob Falls. He had to evacuate his students because their classroom started spinning and wobbling.
Oh, wow.
And it just gives you this really personal sense of how unexpected and frightening this experience was for people in Thailand.
Yeah.
Even what might seem like, moderate tremors can be really alarming, and they required an immediate response.
And then you have the transportation disruptions in Bangkok, which just added to the sense of chaos.
Like,
I mean, they shut down the SkyTrain, the subway. There was severe traffic congestion. Long lines for buses and ride-sharing services were either unavailable or had surge pricing.
wow.
I mean, just getting home became a huge challenge for people.
Yeah, this highlights how interconnected and potentially fragile urban infrastructure is. When something like this happens, even at a distance,
Right.
these disruptions to transportation networks can have a huge impact on daily life and the ability to respond to an emergency.
Okay, so the report also delves into the science behind earthquakes a little bit, and they spoke with a climate and science reporter who explained, you know, tectonic plates, fault lines, the buildup, and sudden release of friction.
Right.
And it helps us understand the forces that are at play here.
Yeah, this earthquake, it most likely occurred along a major strike-slip fault line.
Okay.
And that's where tectonic plates are moving horizontally past each other.
Right.
And earthquakes of this magnitude, they're known to cause widespread damage even far away from the epicenter, which explains why we saw that building collapse in Bangkok.
And what's still a major challenge is that scientists understand where earthquakes are likely to occur based on those, plate tectonics and fault lines,
Right.
but they can't predict exactly when they'll happen.
It's true.
And that makes emergency preparedness really difficult.
Absolutely. And the report also points out the limitations of our early warning systems right now.
Hmm.
They're mostly geared towards secondary effects like tsunamis or for earthquakes that are linked to volcanic activity where you might have some early warning signs, right? But for sudden tectonic earthquakes like this one, it's not really possible yet to predict them in real time.
Yeah, and that just underscores how important it is to have strong building codes, resilient infrastructure in areas that are prone to earthquakes and effective disaster response mechanisms in place.
Yeah, preparedness and resilience are absolutely essential because we just can't predict these events with any certainty.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the numbers are really stark, at least 144 lives lost in Myanmar. And that desperate search for survivors is ongoing in both Myanmar and Thailand.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to ignore the fact that this region is interconnected. An earthquake in one country has had these massive consequences in a neighboring nation. And it really highlights the impact that these kinds of natural disasters have on a regional level, from those immediate casualties and displacement to the effects on migration patterns and the complexity of international aid. It's a lot to think about, and it makes you wonder, considering how unpredictable earthquakes are and how far-reaching their consequences can be, even in areas that aren't considered high risk. How do we approach urban planning and international aid response in seismically active regions around the world?
That's the question.
That's the question that I think we need to keep asking even after the initial shock of the news has passed.
I agree.
Well, thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure as always.
It's been a pleasure as always, and to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.